Discover the amazing transformation, what one night in a freezing medieval dungeon revealed. Sarah never thought she would be standing in the dim light of a medieval dungeon, feeling the weight of despair press down on her like the cold stone walls surrounding her. Just a few months ago, she was a dedicated history teacher, passionate about igniting a love for the past within her students in the small Midwestern towns sapped by budget cuts. Now, as she sat alone amid endless shadows, her dreams seemed as distant as the flickering candlelight struggling to pierce the darkness. The chill settled deep in her bones. Would the fire in her heart ever return? She was supposed to be shaping young minds, not trapped in a relic of history, free from the world yet bound by her own solitude. In her desperation, she had accepted this strange opportunity for a night, hoping it would spark something inside her again. Yet here, in the heart of a cruel came the memories of her students' bright faces now vanished from her life, replaced by the echo of her fading purpose. As the temperature dropped further, anxiety welled up within her, each breath shallow and labored as thoughts spiraled. How could she provide for her young son and aging parents when her career had been stripped away? Tom, her steadfast husband, always supportive but skeptical of her unconventional choices, urged her to find stability, to conform. Would she relentlessly fight back against an uncaring system, or yield to the stifling weight of societal expectations? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The silence became a chorus of her doubts. Just as despair threatened to clutch her heart, her fingers brushed against something cold and hidden in the stone wall. Her heart quickened as she pried open a secret compartment, revealing an ancient manuscript teeming with faded ink and forgotten hopes. The text spoke of a local scholar, shunned and punished for his attempts to elevate his community, echoing her own battle against an unforgiving system. The words rekindled a fire she thought extinguished, igniting determination and purpose to fight for the memory of this invisible hero. But as dawnbreak approached, its light uncertain, so too did the apprehension of sharing her discovery with the town. Would they accept the truth she found, or scorn her for attempting to unearth buried stories that threatened the comfort of their well-worn traditions? The skeptic's whispers in her own mind screamed louder than the fading echoes of the dungeon behind her. Is it worth resurrecting that long-buried truth when the overwhelming present weighs so heavily? Over the horizon of uncertainty loomed the reality of small-town politics, the daunting shadows of entrenched beliefs suffocating her aspirations. Standing at the historic crossroads of ambition and skepticism, Sarah felt the chill of the dungeon still lingering, a reminder of the fight that waited, not just for herself, but for the heart of the community she desperately wished to awaken. As the first light of day broke through the darkness, an imminent sense of action surged within her, but so did the gnawing fear that maybe, just maybe, the town wasn't ready to confront the truths she was now so fervently determined to reveal. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the narrow slits of the dungeon, casting an ethereal glow on the cold stone floor. Sarah crouched on the ground, the ancient manuscript clutched tightly in her hands, its pages whispering secrets that begged to be shared. As she brushed her fingers across the fragile text, her resolve solidified. Her path forward was unclear, but she understood one fundamental truth: she could no longer be a passive observer in her life or the lives of her students. A sense of urgency ignited within her. What implications did this manuscript hold for the town and for her own identity? The resolution to share the discovery meant stepping into the arena of public scrutiny, edifying her fragile psyche against the walls of judgment. The thrill of revelation surged through her veins, steering her thoughts away from the dread of potential rejection. She was no longer merely a history teacher. She was a vessel for change. As she exited the dungeon, the crisp morning air embraced her like a long-lost friend. Each deep breath infused her with clarity, grounding her in the present. She traversed through the familiar streets, anxiety and determination intertwining like wayward roots. The town had its share of skeptics, but it also brimmed with those yearning for inspiration, a fight she could rally on their behalf. Her mind raced as she concocted a plan. She would gather her former students, those bright, eager minds who once soaked up knowledge like a sponge. Perhaps they could awaken the voices of the past, rekindling the sense of wonder they had shared in her classroom. Could they, too, find inspiration in the tale of the shunned scholar after years of disillusionment? Sarah settled on hosting a small gathering, inviting the local youth, their parents, and her former colleagues. The venue was simple, a local library, the heart of knowledge in their community. It was fitting to unveil the manuscript there, where the echoes of learned discourse once thrived. Preparation fueled her spirit. She gathered materials, prepared her speech, and even arranged for snacks to soften the impending conversation. Yet, as the meeting date approached, self-doubt crept back in like a chill wrapping around her heart. She questioned her judgment, and her ability to inspire. Was she any more equipped to lead them through the murky depths of history than she had felt back in the dungeon? Her husband's skepticism loomed in the back of her mind, like an insidious whisper that sought to amplify her fears. What if they don't listen? What if everyone ridicules you for resurrecting old stories? But then she remembered the words from the manuscript, the silent pleas of a forgotten scholar who fought valiantly for his community against the very fabric of mainstream complacency. That connection breathed life into her, as she acknowledged her fears but refused to let them define her actions. Purpose unwavering, she crafted her speech, guiding herself through the labyrinth of her thoughts. The day of the meeting dawned bright and clear. A bittersweet anticipation bubbled within her, each click of her heels against the pavement reverberating a rhythm of resolve. Would they welcome her story, or would it be yet another voice lost in the tumult of indifference? As she stepped into the library, the weight of the manuscript pressed against her chest, a reminder that truth carried power but only when shared. As she prepared to address the gathering, a familiar face appeared in the doorway, a face etched with skepticism and judgment. Tom stood there, arms crossed and brow furrowed, vulnerability masking his usual strength. The moment they locked eyes, recognition dawned between them, an unspoken challenge of faith, a test of belief in one another. In that charged silence, the room filled with eager listeners, all awaiting her words, Sarah felt the temperature of the moment shift. The echoes of her past were reaching out, and for the first time in a long while, she was ready to confront not only the town's skepticism but also the doubts dancing around her heart. Her voice steadied as she prepared to speak, but unknown to her, a more daunting confrontation awaited on the horizon, one that would test the very fabric of her convictions, forcing her to address the shadows of her past amid the flickering hopes of the future. The air inside the library crackled with a palpable tension. Sarah stood before the gathered crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. Each face bore a mixture of curiosity and skepticism that almost felt heavy on her skin. She could perceive their different expectations, some leaning in anticipation of revelation, while others recoiled, prepared to dismiss her words before they even left her mouth. Taking a deep breath, she recalled the first line of the manuscript, an invocation of courage from the scholar who had faced similar adversity. She recalled the moments spent poring over the fragile pages, absorbing the tales of resilience that once echoed through the dusty halls of academia. Here she was, armed with that very knowledge, ready to channel it into a message that could potentially stir her community awake. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice unwavering yet soft. "I stand before you not just as a teacher, but as someone who has recently discovered a truth that was long suppressed." Her words gingerly tugged on the strings of attention, drawing her audience in. She detailed the manuscript's origins, recounting the passion of its author, his struggles against indifference, and his persistent resolve. With each sentence, she peeled back layers of apathy that had settled over the town, stripping away years of disengagement, and igniting flickers of remembrance among the listeners. She could feel her confidence swell. Then, from the back of the room, a voice emerged. "What does this even matter? That was centuries ago. Why should we care?" Tom leaned against the wall, arms still crossed, but now the skepticism in his tone was met with a wave of discord from the audience. Subtle murmurs spread, pooling uncertainty. A rush of doubt threatened to creep in, but Sarah grounded herself with the manuscript in her hand. Because it's not just a story from the past. It's a reflection of who we are today. With increasing passion, she delved into the parallels between the scholars' challenges and their current realities, the risks of silence, the consequences of standing still, and the importance of engaging with their history. As she spoke, Sarah sensed the room shifting. An awakening was blooming among the listeners. Yet, beneath the currents of excitement lay a strange apprehension. Would this newfound awareness tether her and her community to a brighter path, or would it scatter in the face of resistance? The thought tightened her throat, but she pushed through, fervently highlighting the power they wielded together. This was not merely an exchange of knowledge. It was a rekindling of identity. As she wrapped up, she opened the floor for questions, hoping the conversation would cascade into something meaningful. Eye contact between her and Tom ignited a flash of connection, something fragile but significant. She dared to hope he might see her effort as more than a misguided venture. The first question bounced towards her, filled with genuine curiosity from a young woman. It sparked a dialogue, and with every back-and-forth exchange, Sarah felt her spirit elongate, shed the confines of self-doubt, and evolve into the leader she had always wanted to be. But just as she began to feel encroaching solidarity in the room, Tom stepped closer, his brow furrowing deeper. But what if this inspiration leads to chaos? What if exposing all this history just breeds resentment? His challenge echoed painfully in her chest, amplifying her insecurities. Was this venture truly worth the risk? As the debate intensified, with voices rising and opinions colliding, Sarah felt her pulse quicken. A storm was brewing. Her aspirations dangled precariously at the intersection of progress and backlash. Would she find the resolve to bridge this growing divide, or would fear tighten its grip once more, silencing her voice? The answers lay tangled in the conversation spiraling around her, ready to test the very essence of her commitment. The clamor of voices melded into a cacophony, strands of doubt and hope twisting together like the tendrils of a storm. As Sarah stood at the center of it all, she could almost feel the weight of Tom's question pressing against her chest. Each rebuttal, each impassioned plea to seek understanding, lit small fires of resolve amidst the chaos. Yet, his words lingered like shadows, threatening to overshadow the light of her message. Moments passed, stretching under the strain of uncertainty. She noticed the young student, eyes bright with the thirst for knowledge, attempt to interject but was drowned out by louder clamoring. The sight tugged at Sarah. She knew it was in these moments that futures could be shaped, ideas could collide, and perhaps sparks of inspiration could ignite. Everyone deserves to be heard, she reminded herself, and realizing the veracity of that statement rekindled her determination. What is the point of this rallying cry if I can't embrace the discomfort? Stepping forward, she raised a tentative hand, calling for silence. When the room finally quieted, she locked eyes with Tom, his expression still wary but something softer flickered there, just below the surface. You raise a valid concern, Tom, she began, her voice steady, masking the storm inside. Exploring our history does carry risks, especially when confronted with difficult truths. Her heart thrummed in her chest as she continued, unearthing experiences where reflection led to transformation. But history also offers lessons on resilience and redemption. What if, instead of chaos, we dared to imagine a conversation that fostered understanding and empathy? She paused, weighing the reactions around her like a tightrope walker gauging the wind. Let us not shy away from discomfort. Instead, let us engage with it. We owe it to ourselves to examine our narratives, as painful as they may be. The room shifted again, an atmospheric change that felt palpable. Sarah felt a swell of hope, a shift from skepticism to contemplation. This was her chance to lead, she could almost grasp it. Inspiration surged within her, as she recalled the suitable question she'd been crafting in the back of her mind for this very moment. What if we approached our history not as a source of division, but as a means to build bridges? The young woman who had initially asked the question raised her hand once more, buoyed by Sarah's burgeoning resolve. But how do we begin to change the narrative we are so used to? With renewed fervor, Sarah thought of the connections in classrooms, the diverse stories untold. It starts with listening. Every voice matters. Your stories, your truths, they weave a tapestry of who we are. We cannot afford to remain silent any longer. One by one, more hands went up, a flurry of stories and questions surfacing from the depths. The conversation twisted and turned like a living creature, and for the first time, uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like an opportunity. Yet, amid the budding optimism, a gnawing doubt lingered. Were the threads of encouragement strong enough to withstand the weight of the past? She could not ignore the glimpses of dissent that still flickered in some eyes across the room. Would they embrace vulnerability or resist it? As the discussion took flight, Sarah felt herself at the helm of a burgeoning manifesto for change, and yet the specter of fear loomed ominously in her periphery. Would she summon the courage to continue navigating this treacherous path? The fracture between progress and backlash widened, but so did a sense of agency previously unbeknownst to her. Tonight begins a new chapter for us all, she declared, hoping to tilt the balances firmly toward a vision of unity. Sensing the potential yet tempered with trepidation, she knew that their next steps could create a new legacy or deepen the divides they had just begun to bridge. Tom watched her closely, and in his eyes she recognized an unspoken question. Are you ready to see this through? With the stakes rising higher, she felt the pressure mount. The resolve nestled in her chest remained unyielding, but what would the future demand of her commitment as the currents of opinion shifted wildly around her? Are you ready to face the chaos? That haunting question lingered like a stubborn echo, urging her forward into the unknown. The time had come to make a choice. With the night thickening around her, Sarah could hardly shake the weight of Tom's question from her mind. The room was charged with an ambient tension, punctuated by the nervous shuffling of feet and whispered conversations. For a fleeting moment she considered retreating, allowing others to take the reins, but a deeper impulse whispered, this was her moment. Drawing in a fortifying breath, she anchored herself to the present. This wasn't solely about her, it was about the potential of those gathered, each peculiar story tugging at threads of unity. Sarah recalled her own struggles, the times she had felt unheard in fragmented discussions that invariably fell flat. Those memories kindled a fire within her, urging her onward. I won't let this be just another meeting, she muttered under her breath, her own voice a quiet promise. That is why this dialogue matters, she said more loudly, grappling for clarity in the throbbing uncertainty. History shouldn't be a monologue. It's far richer as a chorus of voices. As she scanned the room, she recognized familiar faces that reflected a mixture of skepticism and hope, and she felt the undeniable tether of responsibility. When we open ourselves to the stories of others, we begin to unlock empathy. The term empathy sat on her tongue like a promise she felt unprepared yet compelled to make. A hand shot up, breaking her train of thought. It was the same young woman who had inquired about changing narratives. But what if those stories clash? What if we can't agree on the narrative? The question propelled a ripple of uncertainty through the audience, and Sarah felt the wave crash. How could she assure them they could constructively engage even the most challenging stories? We need to accept that conflict is part of understanding, she countered, hoping her voice was stronger than her quaking heart. Embracing disagreement fosters growth. If we avoid the tough parts, we fail to see the whole picture. The energy in the room shifted. Encouraged, she elaborated, think of it like a puzzle. Every piece has its place, no matter how mismatched they may seem at first. The metaphor hung in the air, morphing as audience members visualized their stories fitting into a larger narrative. Yet beneath Sarah's rallying words lay an undercurrent of doubt. She realized it would be up to her to forge a cohesive vision from what threatened to become chaos. Commitment loomed over her like a question mark. Could she guide this effort toward meaningful change? Dare to ask uncomfortable questions, she urged, inspired by her own resolve. They are where innovation lives. Alone, we are limited. Together, we can navigate complexities. Feeling emboldened, she proposed a practical step, breaking into smaller groups to explore personal stories tied to common historical themes. The murmurs of agreement and occasional hesitation validated her. They were ready, if only a little uncertain. As they formed their groups, Sarah positioned herself in the center, catching Tom's eye again. She saw him nod slightly, signaling his tentative support. A wave of relief coursed through her. This wasn't just about overcoming objections, it was about crafting something greater than herself. Yet, as discussions began bubbling over in hushed tones, a knot of awareness twisted in her gut. What if they only further entrenched their divisions in these smaller circles? Anxiety spiked. This pivot could either yield understanding or ignite further dissent. Determined to not let doubt dictate her actions, she moved closer to one of the clusters, eager to not only guide them but also to listen. Confronting the collective narratives required her to be present, to redefine her role from mere facilitator to genuine participant. But as she engaged deeper in the discussions, new challenges emerged. The very people she hoped to unite were grappling with biases she hadn't anticipated. Was her vision naive? A creeping dread whispered that an unresolved conflict lay just beneath the surface. As the night wore on, Sarah felt the pressure swell. This gathering could either foster understanding or become a battleground of ideologies. Uncertainty gnawed at her resolve, tightening its grip as raw emotions echoed across the room. Can I withstand this storm? She questioned internally, caught between the desire for change and the terrifying possibility of failure. With every proclamation, the stakes grew higher. The challenge of bridging their complex viewpoints weighed heavily upon her shoulders. Would she rise to the occasion, or would she allow fear to snuff out the flickering flame of hope she had ignited? And then, just as the first wave of intricate discussions began to unfold, a loud voice pierced the buzz. Why are we even trying to change anything? Things are fine as they are. In that moment, the fragile tapestry of understanding hung in the balance, and Sarah realized this was only the beginning of a deeper confrontation she was unprepared for. The conversation was no longer just about sharing stories. It had become a crucible of belief in which ideals would clash and the tenacity to persevere would be tested. The real question now echoed even louder in her thoughts. Are you ready to confront the truth? The startled silence following the interruption was palpable. Sarah's heart raced, threading her thoughts through a broad spectrum of reactions that could unfold. The voice that challenged the very essence of her initiative belonged to Greg, a figure known for his staunch adherence to the status quo. His words reverberated in her mind, twisting her gut with an unsettling blend of frustration and determination. Things are fine as they are, he had said, his tone dripping with a condescending confidence that stifled any remnant of cohesion in the room. As eyes turned toward her, expectant yet skeptical, Sarah felt the weight of her own ambitions press down harder than before. Greg, she began, keeping her voice steady. Change often sparks from discomfort. Growth can occur if we set our sights solely on what seems adequate. A quick flicker of defiance sprung into his eyes, but she could sense others were beginning to lean in, attentive to the emerging dialogue. The stakes had shifted. She had to challenge him confidently, or risk losing traction. But why should we bother? Greg countered, arms crossed defiantly. There's too much risk in unsettling what's already working for us. The scene played out like a delicate dance, each word a step into an unknown rhythm. Sarah sensed a mix of fear and curiosity from the others, wrestling with whether to stand with her or cling to comfort. Because, Greg, what's working is often simply the loudest narrative drowning out the quieter ones, she replied, her determination fueling her resolve. How many voices don't we hear because we're too comfortable with the loudest? Real strength comes from understanding, not avoidance. As she spoke, additional voices chimed in, shifting the dynamics of the room slightly. They debated, challenged, and leaned into this newfound uncertainty. With each exchanged word, cracks appeared in the unspoken agreement of complacency that had once held them. The deeper Sarah waded into the discussion, the clearer her understanding of this moment became. Each response illuminated facets of argumentation she hadn't anticipated. Viewpoints she had previously deemed hostile began to reveal the complexities of their backgrounds and beliefs. The group's tension simmered, and she knew she needed to harness this energy, transmute it into a drive toward connection rather than conflict. But would this volatile environment forge enlightenment or shatter progress? This question loomed over her like an impending storm, and symbol of her internal struggle against doubt. Determined, she shifted her approach once more. What if we took a step further? Let us consider what we stand to lose if we don't challenge our assumptions together. With a sharp inhale, she proposed a bold idea, small pairs, mixing those who aligned with Greg and those who felt marginalized. Let us each share a personal story that reflects what we value and what we fear about change. This isn't about confrontation, it's about understanding the roots of our beliefs. Some in the room nodded, intrigued. Others hesitated, casting wary glances. Sarah's heart raced. The more she risked, the higher the chance of failure. Yet within her surge of adrenaline lay an undeniable urge for evolution, her personal development intertwined with that of the group. An emotional itch clawed at her, urging her to take the reins even more forcefully. She had to confront Greg, not just as an adversary, but as a key player whose participation could determine the outcome of this conversation. Greg, would you share something personal? Your perspective clearly matters to this group, but it can't solely be an assertion against changing the narrative. The room held its collective breath, and she felt time stretch as Greg considered her request. A mix of vulnerability and defiance pulsed beneath his exterior. Would he choose to reveal his deeper story or retreat into familiar defenses? Watching him, Sarah recognized the thin line between confrontation and connection was what made this moment transformative. But just as she thought he might respond, a low murmur flared up behind her. A different voice, one that she hadn't anticipated, broke through the tension. What if you're afraid that your story isn't strong enough? The room crackled with energy, pulsating with conflicting emotions. Suddenly, the challenge had shifted focus, opening a floodgate of possibilities and drawing more direct lines between each individual narrative. Sarah's mind raced. The debate was veering from productive to dangerously vulnerable, and she realized this was what she truly craved. The unfolding chaos hinted at a revelation, a catalyst for growth if they could endure it together. Would they find the strength to be open with one another? Or would fear drown out the opportunity to uncover truths that lay buried? Sarah braced herself for the unforeseen shifts that awaited her on this fragile path. She felt the undercurrents rock the room. One thing was certain. The question echoing through her mind was no longer just about truth. It had morphed into a deeper inquiry. What are you truly willing to risk for your voice to be heard? The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, a tangible energy radiating as Greg sat poised, choosing his next words with calculated precision. Sarah felt the tension knot in her stomach, a mixture of trepidation and eagerness propelling her forward. She yearned for a breakthrough, for a pivotal moment where collective acknowledgement could dissolve their barriers. As silence enveloped the room, she sensed the others' gazes shift between her and Greg, their silent assessment weighing heavily. The air felt electric. This was no longer just a conversation but a potential turning point. Her heart raced as she made eye contact with Greg, searching for any flicker of a shared understanding. Greg, she pressed gently, we all have stories. Sharing ours could open doors we didn't even know existed. She was aware that pushing him too hard could slam shut the fragile doors she was trying to pry open. Yet, she felt an overwhelming urge to shed light on the shadows looming over the discussion. Despite his defensive posture, she noticed a small shift in his eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Sarah, it's not that simple. His voice was quieter now, perhaps even hesitant. Exposure makes us all vulnerable. What if those stories expose weaknesses? Aren't we risking more than just a discussion? His words struck a chord. The risk involved in vulnerability now loomed larger than ever. Sarah's thoughts churned. How could she address his fears while also driving the momentum of the conversation? The stakes were high, and she had to pursue this carefully. We risk stagnation if we never confront our truths, she countered. It's in our stories where we find common ground, even if it feels uncomfortable. Isn't that worth it? Others began to nod, the collective tension transforming into a chorus of agreement. Sarah sensed the tide was turning, but was it strong enough to break through Greg's defenses? The group swirled with anticipation, each individual leaning toward the precipice of vulnerability. As Sarah continued, she was guided by a developing sense of vision. This wasn't merely about her career aspirations or theories of change. It was about forging authentic connections that could either lift them to new heights or plunge them deeper into the shadows of complacency. Let us take the time to listen, she suggested, her voice imbued with conviction. What if we commit to an open dialogue, a space where each of us can voice our stories? Each shared fear, every uncovered desire? Her words lingered in the air, weighty with significance. Finally, Greg spoke again, a trace of reluctance woven through his tone. All right, I'll go first. But know that my story isn't necessarily pretty. His admission rippled through the group, inviting both skepticism and support. The decision to share was a monumental shift, a crack widening in the fortress of fear each had built around themselves. Sarah sensed that she was no longer navigating the waters alone. The question echoed within her, could this vulnerability lead not just to liberation, but to profound transformation for everyone involved? As Greg began to unveil his story, something remarkable unfolded. The vulnerability he exposed grounded the room, setting off a series of confessions that resonated with the deeper fears each had hunched over for so long. Yet with every truth, Sarah felt an undercurrent of anxiety. The revelations could elevate them or plunge them into chaos. As she listened, mingling with shared laughter and shared sighs, she realized that she was on the cusp of a more significant transition, a shift in her own understanding of impact. The moment Greg's walls began to crack, she witnessed the first glimmer of his humanity, and it struck her like a wave. Suddenly, she was not merely an advocate for change, she stood as a vessel of transformation, a role she had not anticipated. As she prepared to contribute her own story, an unsettling thought pierced through. What if the risk of sharing her truth compelled her to confront something she had buried? Would she be ready to expose the very core of what drove her? The air thickened once more. Whatever happened next would determine not only her future but the balance of their fragile dynamic. Sarah inhaled deeply, bracing herself as she prepared to take the plunge into her own hidden depths. Was she truly equipped for the revelation that awaited her? As Greg's story unfolded, an unforeseen surge of honesty swept through the group. The room, once heavy with tension, began to breathe a collective exhalation that echoed with shared understanding. Sarah listened intently, her heart pounding in rhythm with each word he spoke. Yet, despite the unfolding vulnerability, a shadow loomed over her resolve. What could she possibly share that would match the visceral honesty of Greg's experience? The anxiety began to swirl within her, a churning mix of fear and anticipation. Deep down, she questioned whether her own story was worth sharing or if it would render her as exposed as she feared. The very weakness Greg had highlighted. As Greg's voice wavered, revealing cracks in his carefully constructed armor, Sarah couldn't help but notice how his courage emboldened the others. Each confession, each revelation chipped away at the fortifications the group had so meticulously built around themselves. Agony and triumph intertwined in their expressions as they acknowledged their individual battles. A realization dawned on Sarah. This wasn't solely about vulnerability, but about authenticity. Each shared experience, no matter how grim, created a bridge toward a deeper human connection. It was breathing life into stagnant conversations that had tethered them to superficiality for too long. Yet even with this revelation, the weight of her own untold truth pressed down upon her. She sat still, grappling with her internal conflict. Her mind raced back to moments in her past she had long kept hidden, the failures, the dreams deferred, the moments of hesitation that defined her journey but remained cloaked in shadows. Would she transform from a mere observer to a substantial participant in this narrative? Finally, as silence filled the room in the aftermath of Greg's unveiling, her name floated into the air, a gentle nudge from an eager colleague ready to encourage her to take the leap. What about you, Sarah? They were all watching her now, eyes wide, waiting for her voice to join the chorus. She felt a trembling in her hands, a physical manifestation of her fear. What lay within her was not merely a story, it was a revealing of the self she had often shielded from others. How would they perceive her? Would her past, her failures, transform her into a figure of pity rather than strength? Yet amidst the doubts, there was a flicker of resolve. In that moment, Sarah actively chose to confront her fear, not just for her sake, but for the sake of the collective transformation they were beginning to experience. She was no longer just a voice championing vulnerability, she was a participant in it. Summoning her courage, she cleared her throat, a rush of determination surging through her. I'll share my story, she began, her voice steady despite the tremors in her chest. but I need you all to understand that it's been hard for me to look at it fully. I've struggled with feeling like I don't belong, like I'm an imposter in my own life. I've made choices that felt safe but never challenged me, and I lost sight of who I truly am." As she spoke, she sensed the energy in the room shift. Her words were not merely confessions. They were invitations for connection, a shared exploration of vulnerability rather than a spotlight on her shortcomings. With every detail she revealed her battles, her decisions, even the moments she did regret. She witnessed the room attuned to her journey. This was her enactment of courage, the kind she desperately sought in others. In admitting her own humanity, she was not alone. She felt the echoes of empathy reverberate around her. Just as she began to feel the weight of the room transform into strength, a small voice interrupted, laced with concern. "What if we are just opening old wounds that don't need to be reopened?" It brought the conversation to a standstill, an interruption that left Sarah dangling at the edge of something monumental. Headlines of doubt resurfaced. Would this exploration of their inner struggles genuinely lead somewhere meaningful, or would it unravel everything they had worked to build? The tension resumed its grip, highlighting the fragility of their newfound space. What lay ahead for Sarah hung in the air, a thread trembling with possibility. The moment felt poised for monumental shifts, but not without facing the edgy uncertainty that somehow lurked behind every honest exchange. The real question remained: was she prepared to delve deeper into these unexplored territories, knowing the risks could carve new pathways or deepen their wounds? As Sarah steadied herself, she knew the stakes had risen. The next revelation could very well decide the trajectory of her journey and the connections she desperately sought to forge. The room held its breath, the question lingering uncomfortably in the air. Sarah's mind raced, the flicker of resolve igniting against a backdrop of apprehension. Was she truly ready for the unraveling that might come next? The voice of concern echoed within her, compelling her to reconsider the ground she was willing to tread. She paused, her heart thudding against her ribcage, each beat echoing the uncertainty of her current path. Opening old wounds, wasn't that exactly what she feared? What if the act of sharing only unearthed deeper scars? Her past decisions rose like specters, memories haunting her with their gravity. Yet, this was precisely the moment of conflict she had been avoiding. She needed to confront the fear that had held her captive. Swallowing hard, she locked eyes with her colleagues, gauging their expressions, their expectations, hopes, and apprehensions. Their vulnerability had transformed the atmosphere. She felt an invisible tether connecting her experience with theirs. In that juncture, Sarah yearned for authenticity, for the release that came with revelation, no matter how unsettling. She clung to the belief that the risk of exposure might lead to healing. Exhaling slowly, Sarah set her fears on the table. What if sharing these truths doesn't just reopen wounds but allows them space to heal? She allowed that thought to hang tantalizingly in the air, a potential shift in perspective. Maybe we need to confront these pains so we can finally let them go. Not just for ourselves, but for each other. As her words manifested, the room seemed to pulse with energy, the previous doubts dissolving into a collective readiness for deeper exploration. It was no longer solely her story. It had morphed into an invitation for each person to examine their own struggles. Together, they could navigate the uneasy waters of vulnerability. "I remember when I was in college," she began, feeling the familiar thrill of trepidation thread through her. "I was excited about everything life had to offer, but I always felt like I was walking on glass. One misstep would expose me for who I really was." A nervous chuckle escaped her lips, a cathartic release that tentatively set the tone. "Sure enough," I stumbled. "I didn't take chances because it was safer to stay in my comfort zone." Each word felt like a stepping stone, fragile yet purposeful. She shared how, during her first job, she hid behind a facade of competence, terrified that revealing her uncertainties would lead to rejection. "I often felt less than my colleagues, like a shadow in a room full of bright lights." And laying her feelings bare, she sought not just understanding but acceptance. As she shared, other faces shifted, their expressions washing over with familiarity. The fears that had lived inside her also resided in them, creating a tapestry woven with shared experiences of self-doubt and hesitation. Their silent acknowledgement of her journey was validating. Sarah could feel the shift from solitude to solidarity. But just as momentum surged, another voice chimed in, this time echoing louder than before. But is this genuinely helping us, or just digging us deeper into darkness? Do we really want to touch those old pain points? Her insides writhed at the critique, yet realized how pivotal this inquiry was. The concerns voiced echoed her own earlier hesitation. Was it fair for her to pull everyone deeper when the path remained unclear? The questions loomed, heavy against the possibility of progress. Sarah faced this moment squarely, not shying away from the conflict. She recognized that the conversation demanded an alignment of both courage and caution, a necessary dance with vulnerability that could guide them toward healing. Maybe pain isn't the destination but rather the catalyst for a much-needed change, Sarah responded, her voice gaining clarity. This isn't just about dredging up the past, it's about uncovering the strength that comes from confronting who we are, flaws and all. Each declaration unfolded like petals in bloom. Deep within the uncertainty, she rediscovered conviction. It ignited a question that rippled through the group. What would emerge if they collectively chose to confront their shadows instead of retreating back into safety? The moment shimmered with palpable tension, vibrating with possibilities yet unanswered. Everyone sensed it. The urge to dive deeper rumbled beneath their feet, begging for exploration. But as they tread closer to the precipice of their revelations, the stakes weighed heavier than before. Would they commit to this endeavor together? Determined, Sarah kept her eyes on the collective, sensing they were standing on the brink of something transformational. What lay beyond this moment, though, remained draped in uncertainty, a tantalizing mystery that glimmered in the shadows. Would this be their moment of truth, or merely an unsettling detour? Only by pushing into the unknown would they discover where their paths would ultimately lead. Days turned into weeks as Sarah passionately shared the contents of the ancient manuscript and facilitated discussions throughout the community. Each meeting transformed into a vibrant tapestry of voices, revealing untold narratives that had long languished in silence. The reception varied. Some attendees embraced the confrontation of past truths, while others still clung to complacency. But amidst the ebb and flow of opinion, Sarah experienced profound personal growth, reshaping her identity from simply a history teacher into an influential catalyst for change. One evening, as she prepared for yet another gathering, she stumbled upon a message in her inbox from a former student, Caroline. "Thank you for inspiring us to face our stories. I've never been prouder of our history or our town." The weight of those words felt monumental. Caroline's message echoed through her mind. She was no longer an isolated figure lost in the corridors of academia. She had become part of something much larger. The realization solidified her commitment to embracing her newfound role with unwavering resolve. The night of a pivotal town hall meeting arrived, set to be a crossroads for the community. Sarah entered the dimly lit hall and took a moment to scan the sea of familiar faces. Tom stood at the back, his presence a variety of emotions balanced on the precipice of faith and skepticism. As she approached the podium, she acknowledged her own transformation. No longer afraid to confront differing opinions, she stood stronger than ever before, ready to navigate similar choppy waters. Opening the meeting with a sense of clarity, she reiterated the lessons embedded in the manuscript, sharing compelling parallels between the scholar's struggles and those faced by the community today. Comments from the past resonated painfully in her memory, reminiscent of times when she felt vulnerable and small. Yet, standing before the crowd now, she felt the surge of purpose. Establishing her voice amidst high stakes bolstered her confidence. As the discussion surged into intense debate, Sarah witnessed the blossoming of discourse that had once been stifled. The tension held an underlying undertone of respect, a symphony of differing thoughts harmonizing around a shared goal. Voices that had once clashed began to listen, a recognition of the journey they all undertook together unfolding right before her eyes. When the floor opened for questions, a confident young man stepped forward, his eyes eager yet apprehensive. "What if we still disagree? How do we move forward?" The assembly sat hushed, the collective breath of anticipation palpable. Sarah offered a passionate reminder: disagreement is part of dialogue. It's in those moments we can stretch our understanding and learn. Let us use our conflicting perspectives to enrich our community story. Another profound shift occurred as members started reflecting on their positions. Differences morphed into conversations seeking resolution, with echoes of empathy becoming prevalent. Sarah felt a clear sense of direction guiding her professional journey forward. The ducks of doubt that once swam around her mind began to clear, replaced now with a vision driven by her deeper understanding of history and culture. As the meeting neared its conclusion, she looked upon the engaged faces lit with newfound perspectives. Tom, arms relaxed at his sides, nodded in encouragement, his skepticism transformed into understanding. It was a moment of validation, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had both embarked on, intensifying their connection. When the assembly officially concluded, Sarah exchanged grateful glances with all present, and it was in that gratitude she realized the profound impact of her journey. She had accomplished a tremendous transformation, not only within herself, but for her community. No longer just a history teacher, Sarah emerged as an empowered leader, poised to inspire and guide others, someone who had proven capable of conquering her fears and allowing voices from history, and those around her, to come alive. With a surge of gratitude, she embraced this role, understanding it was her responsibility to continue empowering the narrative of truth and resilience. She left the venue that night invigorated. The transformation of a chilly night spent in darkness had crystallized into the blazing potential for a vibrant community of voices sharing a hopeful tomorrow. It is your turn to take action. You need to subscribe now to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Help others find their journey of transformation. Comment below with your reactions and theories about Sarah's journey and its impact. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to spread the inspiration.